In the quiet hour before sunrise, when the city still held its breath and the first faint light pressed gently against the windows of the kitchen, Craig Melvin sat at the table with a cup of coffee that had long since cooled, reflecting on a career that had unfolded not only in front of cameras, but in countless small conversations that never made it to the air. For most viewers who watched him each morning, Craig was the steady voice guiding them through headlines, the calm presence translating the day's events into something understandable. But in recent years, something else had quietly become just as important to him, something that had nothing to do with ratings or teleprompters and everything to do with the young journalists who often approached him with nervous smiles and hopeful questions. That morning, his thoughts drifted to a message he had received the night before from a young reporter who had once interned at the network. The message was simple. "You probably don't remember this, but you once told me that my voice mattered. I've never forgotten that." Craig smiled softly at the memory, because the truth was, he remembered. He remembered the uncertainty in the young man's voice, the way he had lingered after a newsroom tour, as if deciding whether to speak. Craig had recognized that look immediately. It was the same look he himself had carried decades earlier when he first stepped into the intimidating world of national media, wondering if someone like him truly belonged there. Those early years had not always been easy. The newsroom could be a demanding place, and sometimes an isolating one, especially for those who didn't see many people who looked like them sitting at the anchor desk. Yet along the way, Craig had encountered mentors who changed everything with just a few encouraging words or a moment of honest guidance. They hadn't simply taught him how to report a story, they had shown him how to believe that his perspective mattered. Now, after decades in journalism, Craig realized that the most meaningful legacy he could leave behind might not be the stories he had reported, but the doors he helped open for others. Across the table, Lindsay Charniak watched him thoughtfully as she stirred her own coffee, already sensing the familiar reflective mood that sometimes accompanied these quiet mornings. Over the years, she had listened to countless conversations about young reporters Craig had met, students from journalism programs, interns navigating their first newsroom, or aspiring broadcasters who simply needed someone to tell them they were on the right path. "You're thinking about them again, aren't you?" she asked gently. Craig nodded. "I keep realizing how much those early conversations matter," he said. "Sometimes people don't need a long speech. They just need someone to look them in the eye and say, 'You belong here.'" Lindsay smiled because she knew how deeply Craig believed that. As a journalist herself, she understood how powerful mentorship could be, particularly in an industry that often moved at a relentless pace. Many young reporters arrived full of passion, but quickly discovered how intimidating the profession could feel. A single moment of encouragement could change the trajectory of an entire career. Craig often said that the future of journalism depended on voices that reflected the full diversity of the communities they served. Stories were richer, more truthful, and more compassionate when they were told by people who understood the many different experiences that shaped the world. Over the years, Craig had made it a quiet, personal mission to create opportunities for those voices. Sometimes that meant offering advice after a speaking engagement. Other times, it meant taking the time to read a young reporter's script, offering thoughtful feedback long after the official workday had ended. To him, mentorship was never about grand gestures. It was about consistency, the willingness to show up again and again for someone who was still finding their confidence. Craig remembered one particular afternoon not long ago when a group of journalism students had visited the studio. Among them was a young woman who seemed unusually quiet during the tour. Afterward, she approached him hesitantly and confessed that she wasn't sure she had what it took to succeed in broadcast journalism. Craig listened carefully before telling her something he genuinely believed, that the best journalists were often the ones who asked themselves that very question, because it meant they cared deeply about doing the work well. Months later, she sent him a message saying she had decided to continue pursuing the career she loved. Moments like that stayed with him longer than any broadcast. As the morning light slowly filled the kitchen, Craig looked out the window and felt a quiet sense of gratitude. Journalism had given him the extraordinary privilege of witnessing history and telling stories that mattered. But mentorship offered something different, something that extended beyond a single moment in time. It allowed him to help shape the storytellers who would carry the profession forward long after his own broadcasts ended. Lindsay reached across the table and touched his hand. "You know," she said, "most people think your legacy is the news you've delivered, but I think it's the people you've encouraged." Craig considered that for a moment, realizing how true it felt. The world of journalism would continue to evolve, as it always had, but the heart of the profession would remain the same: listening to people, telling their stories, and helping others find the courage to do the same. He finished his coffee and stood, preparing for another day in the studio. Somewhere out there, he knew, a young journalist might be watching, wondering if they had a place in the industry. If his voice, steady and familiar through the morning broadcast, could give even one of them the confidence to believe they did, then every early morning and long newsroom conversation would be worth it, because the future of storytelling would be in hands ready to carry it forward with honesty, compassion, and the courage to speak for communities whose voices deserve to be heard.